Well, hi from down under. Wow, what an experience this has been. Okay, where do we begin? Just go, says Jordan. Right, let's go back to, probably back to the day I was born, if you want. I was born of a farmer's daughter who really was my father's shadow from the age of about 3. I was his farmhand. He rigged up the farm trucks to teach me how to drive at the age of 3, governed of course, or whatever they call it, and so he could feed hay off the back of the cars, off the back of the truck, and probably within 6 or 12 months I was driving like an adult, including a tractor. So I certainly gained confidence in taking on some major tasks from a pretty young age, and I think that's probably what's got me to where I am today, because I've certainly taken or bitten off a lot more than I can chew over the years, but most of it has been pretty successful. And if I had to repeat it all again, I don't think I'd do an awful lot different. So I think a lot of people would would like to be able to say the same thing. Also, as a farmer's daughter, I also learnt an awful lot about animal husbandry. I had a rapport with animals. We had sheep, cows, horses. Pigs were my favourite in those days, and of course we had farm dogs. We never had a real lassie, but we certainly had plenty of sheep and cattle dogs along the way. So being a typical Scorpion, I'm still getting messages, so I assume I'm still there. I always had self-declared patience, but at the same time, as most Scorpions are, we aren't patient. We make our mind to do something and we need it done tomorrow. And so once I grew up, I started to breed Shetland sheepdogs, which was very ill-timed, well ahead of when I should, in my very early 20s. And after a couple of years, I found that my motivation for doing so was diminishing, and the reason I bred shelties was because I didn't have the facilities. I was living in a very small rented place to breed even shelties, let alone collies, but I always promised myself one day I'd come back and breed my collies. So I eventually gave that idea away, and for my another dream, which derived from probably as a child. We didn't have TV back in those days because I was born in New Zealand, of course, and we were pretty behind the 8 ball there. But Dad was a great storyteller, and as he was in the Second World War, most of the stories were based on the good parts of his experience in the war, and of course he embellished it beyond belief, and it certainly gave me the inspiration to follow in his footsteps, and not in as much as going to war or interested in war, but to the countries he had been in all around North Africa and Europe and Britain, etc. And so a friend of mine, Judy, and I set sail, and we planned to, in those days, well, you couldn't afford to fly, there wasn't much in the way of flying, so we sailed, and we crossed most of the seas by cruise ships or ferries, some as paying passengers and some as stowaways. And overland included an array of travel manoeuvres and took us to some faraway lands, some in the middle of intense wars, and all with a fund of tales to tell. Well, it started off as probably a 1 or 2 year plan, ended up at over 6 years. And we certainly, I wouldn't swap that experience for all the tea in China. That was just an amazing trip. On the way back, overland through Asia, we sailed across from India to Malaysia and came down to top up with some additional money to finish Thailand and those sort of places. And that's where, in Singapore, I met Barry. He was on his way back from a couple of years' trip around the world himself, and he was heading home to Australia. So he went back, and Judy and I carried on for another 3 or 4 months up in Asia, and then we sailed across to Perth. We had enough money left to, between 6 of us off that cruise ship, to hire a car and drive across the Nullarbor Desert to Sydney, where I had a brother living and waiting for us to arrive. And that's where, once again, because Barry was born the same day as my brother, I thought I'd give this guy a ring that I'd met in Singapore and wish him a happy birthday, which Judy and I had a ruling that we always followed up contacts, because it led us to some really extraordinary experiences in faraway places, and gave us opportunities to do things on our travels that most ordinary tourists or travellers don't do, and 90% of them always paid off. So Barry and I were both planning on going back overseas after a year or so of working independently, of course, of each other, to finish our travels and heading more like, say, for South America and Canada, etc. However, that didn't eventuate, and we finally got married and settled down in Sydney. And not too long thereafter, the ambition to start breeding my collies was gnawing at me. And so in the, probably right around the early 80s, we began to establish Vedamea collies. Our first dog that we bought was actually named, his prefix, Adam Boy, and so he was aptly named Adam. And of course what followed then was looking for a good sound brood bitch. So it figured that she would be named Eve for a call name, and that's how our Vedamea prefix eventuated. So if you mix all those or unmix all those figures up, you'll find they spell Adam and Eve. Adam was a combination of 2 well-established kennels, and his mother was bred by another kennel that had bred a brood bitch, a very tightly bred bitch, and a really nice type, deriving from a kennel that was probably the best kennel that Australia ever bred. And we set sail, and we bred a couple of litters, and then one of the litters that we bred, we found that our keeper was really suffering. We accidentally tripped over at a very young age, that he had a really bad anatomical problem, and as a result of that, our veterinarian, who was also a German Shepherd breeder herself, advised us to not waste time breeding on with something that had such a severe anatomical problem. So we looked around in the rest of Australia to see if we could find something that was clear of these problems, and found that the collies in Australia at that time were not testing and were not aware that they had the problem. So unfortunately, a lot of the good dogs in Australia at that time had also a lot of English imports. Some really nice English imports had been imported for quite a few years into Australia. But they also, I found, when I went to England or when I researched England collies, I found that they weren't testing for the same problem. It was probably on the cusp of before testing for all these health issues came into being an accepted fact of life. Apart from America, of course, and Canada, they were well and truly onto it there. So as a consequence, we decided that we wouldn't waste time breeding that we we wouldn't waste time breeding dogs if we couldn't find something that was sound and healthy to start with. And coincidentally so, Australia being such a isolated place from the rest of the world, our gene pool was pretty small, and what we needed to do was look further afield. At that time, I, of course, had a really large library of books on collies, but the ones that really I loved and I couldn't wait to receive this annual every year was the English Collie Handbook, by edited by Audrey Chatfield in England. And every year it arrived, I just scrambled straight to the Lakefield Collies page, and I admired them unbelievably. They were just so outstanding, and my dream and interpretation of what the breed standard really and truly depicted. Unfortunately, Brazil, Australia being a rabbit-free island, and our quarantine restrictions were phenomenal, as were New Zealand, so I couldn't get round that, and there was no way that I was ever going to be able to import a dog from Brazil. So we decided at that stage to have a look at America and just see for ourselves. But of course, the big stopper there was the American quarantine we were looking at 9 months, which was 5 months in Hawaii and 4 months in Australia, and the costs were astronomical. So what we did is we looked around, and it was around 1985 when we began looking, and I found also that it was very hard to find literature on collies in general, particularly from a professional breeder's point of view. And at that same time, Sharon Vanderlip from California was publicising the release of her new book. So I think I got a copy hot off the press, and I think I read it until it was almost all printed, worn off the pages. It gave me the incentive to look again at America, regardless of the quarantine time and the expense. And it was just coincidental that the Collie Club of America's Centennial Show was coming up in '86 in Chicago. So we decided that we would come look. It was we wanted to see what was on offer, and we knew that their size was much bigger, and it was a no-no here, and or the no-no here, England, etc., and they were just far too big. But we decided we would come look for ourselves, and so we set sail for the Centennial National. Well, as you can imagine, size-wise, the fanfare and it was just mind-blowing for us when we walked in. The show was, of course, limited to 1,000 of the best dogs, and the way they did things was just it was just amazing, absolutely amazing. And of course I had a catalogue, and it was so different to here. I think my biggest joy at the time was prejudging, and I was particularly impressed with the bitches, and I also loved the fact that Bill Broken and I had a very similar eye for collies, and I was just glued to his judging. And there were some really lovely, lovely bitches, and in roughs. Unfortunately, in those days, I didn't understand the value of the smooth, and I didn't appreciate the smooth like I do today. But the bitches were absolutely, as I say, they were just beautiful. Of course, they were groomed to perfection compared to how we groomed and trimmed them. And what I like most about them is, in America, the dogs were all shown freestanding. There was no holding their head up and holding their legs up, as we always did here, and it made so much difference as a viewer to watch that sort of thing. Of course, we then discussed with a few of the breeders what possibility was of buying stock, and some of the people I met there at the show were people that today, after almost 34 years, we became friends with, and today we still are. Probably my bestest friend that I've been friends with from that first show in '86 was Hildy Morgan, and Hildy and I, her and George had come to Australia, and we've been able to host them here, and we've stayed with him many, many times in America. So just making the friendships from our involvement with the American collies has been amazing and long-lasting. So what we had to consider was an awful lot of consideration. The first thing we did is we approached some of the breeders that we admired, and we found at that time that the Japanese people were paying big money, really big money, for the American collies. And it was actually bigger money than it was going to cost for us to do 9 months quarantine, and the flight alone, because the flights to fly a dog to Australia in those days was probably 4 times the price of a first class ticket one way. And yet, because Barry worked for Qantas, we could fly for nothing by comparison, but the cost, there was no discount on animals for staff, so the cost was just out of this world. So we had to come back home and think about why we went there in the first place, which we were there looking for some foundation stock of health had to come first, because our health issues here were not good. But we also had to be sensible of the fact that we had to make sure, like for example, some of the dogs, particularly from the West Coast, at that '86 Centennial show, were so big to our eye, and I would say to myself, well, how many years is it going to take you to breed that size down? Which is something I didn't know, and I thought, I could be dead before I succeeded there. And also, as I said, the Japanese were offering really big money, but the breed type and the health issues were so far ahead that it was, a lot to contemplate and a lot to ponder in the way of a huge financial commitment. And also, my probably last but not the least to consider was, would I be able to succeed in taking on such a large commitment, both physically and financially. Now, the American collie was just not even spoken of in Australia back in those days, because the first thing is it was well and truly out of our standard with the height restrictions. Also, we were very, and still are unfortunately, biased on colour, and we used to, and we still are, sticking to, tricolour, blue merle and sabres, and that was it. Where America's gene pool, but America's gene pool was open to no matter what colour it was, whether it was merle or whatever it was, you were still breeding with it. There might have been some, there were some restrictions in what you could show, but overall, the American people utilised all the genetics they had, and we at home didn't. We threw so many times through the baby out with the bathwater, and in his limited gene pool, that hadn't helped our lack of advancement in the collies. So anyway, we came back home and we sat down and thought about what we could do, and the bottom line was it was a mammoth task and something the average person wouldn't even contemplate taking on. However, I decided in the end that we had purchased a proven pair of producers from range-shade collies, half brother, half sister, and that's what we did. The dog, but both of the dog and bitch were, the dam was strictly English breeding. And because Dr. Benlip did not believe that Americans should have ever changed the standard, which was neither here nor there, that was her opinion, and hence the reason she bought something from England. Now the dog was sired by Kingsmark, Mountain Man it was, and I'd been to the Kingsmark kennels, and I was quite impressed with a lot of their collies. Some of them were big, but a lot of them were quite more keyed into to our size over here. The bitch, however, although she turned out to be an excellent brood bitch, she was sired by a dog called Incandescent Intrepid Image, and if you looked at his pedigree, it wasn't anywhere near as tightly bred as the Kingsmark, and therefore it didn't have the same traits and prepotency for breed type as the Kingsmark dog did. But anyway, that's what we did. We imported two of them, and the quarantine period was phenomenal. I think a lot of the American people were also a little nervous about us when we inquired to import something at that stage while we were at the National, because they didn't like the thought of their dogs, which was fair enough, of being quarantined somewhere for 9 months. But what they didn't know is, and neither did I at that time, I guess, but what happened is I flew to Hawaii at least twice a month to personally check on the dogs and go to quarantine and get to know them, and did a lot of my own grooming, and I also paid for special food so that they were fed as I would have fed them. So that happened for 4 months, and then the last month they were what they call private quarters, and a friend I'd met, what were their names? They owned Uptown Girl. I've forgotten their names now offhand, but they arranged for me for a wonderful home for the month that they were in private residence in Hawaii, and then we brought them home to Australia where they did another 4 months. Fortunately, I lived very close to the quarantine station, and I think our visiting was every day, every day or at least twice a week, I can't remember now, but it was regular. So the dogs did get a regular socialisation apart from kennel hands and quarantine. So once we started this journey, we did decide to breed, of course, the breeding pair together, but we also had some stock of our own that we had bred and kept, but were reluctant to breed with because of this major problem, which they'd all been tested and they all had these same constructional problems. However, our vet had devised this program whereby she was working with her own breed, which, as I said, German Shepherds, and with Rottweilers and heavy breeded dogs, to try and clean up the same problem in them. And what she was doing is she would X-ray a litter of 8-week-old puppies and check out these problems. And at least, although she couldn't say to you, look, that's how they're going to end up as 1 or 2-year-olds and so on, she could tell you that the different angles of the bones, the depths of the joints, the depths of sockets, and all those sort of things. She could give you an indication of for the ones you wanted to keep. In other words, the problem was so bad, it was pretty easy to tell even in a puppy which way it would go. And a lot of the people boo-hooed this scheme she had going, but I was certainly prepared to give it a go. And as she said, if you don't try and utilise some of your own stock here, you can't keep importing dogs at that sort of a rate and expense. And between working in with Karen, who was a wonderful vet, it didn't take us too long to eradicate the problem, which was really quite surprising. It was excellent. It gave us the opportunity to never select a keeper that that didn't show these problems. I mean, they might show them, but mildly was better than nothing at all. So we were pleased to be able to do that. Anyway, not too long after, probably 3 or 4 years after our inputs here, we had nothing quality or relevance in our opinion to show at that time, so I put my every moment into breeding, and it was hard work. I was breeding with flat stick to try and establish a type and with keeping my eye on the health issues. Well, the first litter I bred, out came a bitch called Vedamea rags to riches, and in that litter, I think there were 6. They were a very tidy litter actually for an outcross, and from the minute rags, I trained them from day one like the Americans did, where they showed naturally, and they looked amazing by comparison to the way we used to place their legs and hold their tails and whatever we did, and hold their ears. And so the first time she stepped foot in the ring, I mean, she was a nice bitch. She was a lovely type, sound as a bell, and she looked amazing. So that was very pleasing from where I had come to where I was in a reasonable short amount of time. Then the next litter we bred was the 2 American imports, the range-shade imports, and we produced, we kept 2 keepers from that. One was a male who was just the most amazing looking pup you'd ever seen. He just walked out and said, listen, I own the world. He just was glorious. And his little sister was a much more slow maturing puppy, but and nowhere near as showy as her brother. But funnily enough, unfortunately, the gorgeous puppy dog turned out to be 1, he didn't produce, and 2, it was just as well he didn't, because his conformation went in a way that you wouldn't have bred him anyway. So it's amazing how puppies, especially when you're not used to the lines or watching them mature, and of course you were working with quite a few mixes in here, so it was hard to see from a baby what it was going to end up like. So tails just didn't enter our breeding program, and he wouldn't have even if he was fertile. But the bitch, she was excellent. She was a great brood bitch, and I spent more time breeding her than I ever bothered showing her, because she was too important to our program. So from there, we, the little bitch, Rags, one of her first few shows, at 9 months of age, I flew her to the Sydney, sorry, not the Sydney, the Perth Royal when she was 9 months old. And I also took Tails, the baby puppy, who was in baby class at that time, and had no idea that this could happen with a 9-month-old bitch, but she won Group 1 at a Royal. Now that's similar to your, I say Westminster. We have Royals in each state here every year, and a 9-month-old bitch was, but she was a glorious bitch. And so that was a big thrill for us. And then immediately thereafter, Tails goes and wins baby puppy in show. So there it was, in group, I beg your pardon, not in show, in group. So there you are, the best of two, and I only took two with me. After that, we found that, yes, there were some litters that we bred that we ran on, but we didn't show them because we needed to watch how they were maturing. And some litters, we never kept anything. But what we did do is we went back after we placed them as pets and checked them out, and was able to see if we should have kept that, we shouldn't have kept that. And of course, there was things in hindsight we would have done differently then. However, on the whole, I think we definitely made more good decisions than bad decisions. And although Barry was always a silent partner, so to speak, it didn't take him too long to actually tune his iron. And he was extremely helpful in that way, because he would watch them and spend a lot of time playing with them. By this time we'd moved on to acreage, and he would play with them in the paddock, and he would watch them, and he would watch their antics and that in a natural environment. You know, he'd come in and say, you know, that one you're looking at, I don't think that's as good as da 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 da. And it wasn't too long before most of my decisions were made along with him, because he certainly was tuning his iron. Anyway, by this time I was interested in increasing my genetics, probably made the decision to bring in another 2 range shades quicker than I should have. I should have waited a bit longer, but anyhow, I did, and I bought in 2 blue mills. Both of them were fairly tightly bred on King's Mark again, and they were also half brother, half sister. The dog actually was a great asset to our genetics, but the bitch just didn't produce. She produced 1 live pup, and it only lasted a couple of days, so that was a bit of a disappointment. But the dog, he contributed a lot in breed type himself, and helped us advance in our improvement of the collie. And by this time, the people here in Australia were softening a little bit, because we were successful, and they could see that our breed type was improving at quite a fast rate, and but they at the same time were they just weren't confident enough to delve into something from another world, so to speak. So unfortunately, they could have, I think the breed here in Australia could have, those genetics could have advanced a lot more of our collies here in Australia if people had had the confidence. But that's nothing like hindsight. So over the next 10 years, we spent time cementing our type and keeping our health issues in check, and all the while we were gleaming the USA for more genetics, and quarantines had decreased immensely. They had gone from 9 months quarantine, as I said before, down to, I think the next one was 6 months, and it was all done in Australia. However, that other 3 months had to be required an awful lot of testing in America before they were allowed to leave, and understandably, breeders in America weren't really prepared to go through all the hullabaloo of doing all these pre-testing things and keeping dogs on for export to Australia. They had more than they could cope with themselves without mucking around with that. So it was difficult to find breeders that were prepared to do that. Anyhow, over those 10 years, we came back and checked out, went to quite a few nationals, and every second or third year we would come for a national. We would check out the bloodlines, we would look at the type that we liked, and at the same time we built up relationships and confidence with various breeders in order to the possibility of getting something from their kennels. And eventually this rapport with the breeders, with different breeders, paid off. In the turn around about the year 2000, I had started, I got very heavily involved in the judges training scheme here, and began becoming licensed to judge other breeds. And I felt this broadened my horizons in, it made me look at my own breed in a much more in-depth way. It was a great experience to learn about the form and functions of other breeds, and just overall in general, it gave me more experience in breeding dogs. And of course then I got busy judging, both in Australia and New Zealand, and our dog shows are structured here in Australia a lot different to England and America, in the respect that we are lucky if we have 2 specialty shows in 1 year in each state here. And in fact, if you look at all of the states, you're lucky if you want to fly, and our land mass is only about 30% less than the USA. So you had to fly a long way to find maybe 1 or 2 more specialty shows in other states per year. And so on the whole, we were judged by what we call all-rounders. And unfortunately, a lot of these all-rounder judges, including myself, although I believe that I don't, or I'd like to think I didn't, ever judge other breeds or have my own breeds judged with an attitude of all dogs move with the same form and function. And this, unfortunately, because we do compete against so many different breeds, we only have, well, as I say, 2, maybe 4 specialties a year if you're lucky, but we have about 12 all breed shows within driving distance every single weekend of the year. So 90% of your exhibition is being judged by all-rounders, and a lot of all-rounders do not understand the relevance of form and function on different breeds. So a lot of breeders will breed dogs which end up with a generic gait in order to attract the attention of judges, and that is something that's really sad here. So, but at the same time, it does make people, make breeders, like say for example in collie breeders, it makes them more aware of the soundness construction rather than breed type. So in other words, the type suffers because they're concentrating on the movement of the dogs. And that was confirmed recently when Miranda Blake from England was out here judging a specialty show, and she was saying that she had never seen collies that moved as soundly, and all of 99% of our shows are outside, were moving so soundly and most correctly moved like a collie should anywhere in the world. And as you know, Miranda Blake, or a lot of you would know, Miranda Blake does judge in lots of different countries of the world, and she has been around. She was virtually born in a welcome box. So that was a compliment. And in addition, Miranda said that she was very pleased to see and how the Australian people had infused the American lines in with the Australian lines, and of course a lot of British dogs are also infused with ours, and she thought we had done an amazing job, and she believed that the good ones that she found and what she judged here could win anywhere in the world. And I took that as a great compliment. I had some dogs of my own entered, and they've done very, very well. So that was something to think about. Now, talking about dogs that are probably going back to the 86th centennial, the dog that probably inspired me the most and really gave me the wow factor is a dog called, his name was Milas Glorybound, and he walked into the specials ring standing still and showing himself. He just blew me out of the water. He was absolutely amazing. Now, he didn't place, and I have to say, had I been judging, he wouldn't have placed either. He had a problem with his movement that day. I don't know whether he'd had an injury or what it was, but it's the only time I ever got to see him move. But he was type-wise, balance, head, everything about that dog was amazing. Beautifully groomed, lovely coat. He had everything I'd want in a collie. So, believe it or not, a dog that wasn't placed, and I agreed with it. But for type-wise, he was my... And it wasn't for, probably 15, 20 years later, maybe more, that I found out that Milas actually was infused with the Lakefield dogs and vice versa. So, I mean, that was very, very interesting. Anyhow, moving on to bitches, there was a few other dogs that, the main dogs that impressed me at that show in those days were Twin Creeks, Executive, some of their Kingsmark, Applause, Grandhill, and a lot I like maybe not have placed, but they were the ones that attracted my eye. There was another dog called, I don't know how you say it, Hell Keldy, I think it was called, Silverfire, and it was owned by a lady called Carol Baton Phelps, who was a famous artist, as you know, over there, and made a lot of the bronze statues and that. And he was a dog, and I couldn't find anything in his breeding from sire or dam that I recognised and never have. But he won his class. And now, unbeknown to me, while I was one night while we were socialising at that CCFA, I touched on speaking about that particular dog, and unbeknown to me, Carol Baton Phelps was in the conversation, but no one, had anything to say about her connection with him. And I had said how much I liked the dog. Anyway, a couple of years later, that Carol, her drawing, I think they called it Collie Champions of the 80s, turned up in a tube for me, and it was a limited edition, and it's probably one of the most gorgeous collie drawings, paintings that I own. So that's something that's always stayed in my mind, and I don't believe that she's still around. When I say I don't know if she's still involved in collies or not, I've no idea. But he was a dog that also took my eye, but I still don't know what his breeding was. Anyhow, back to the National. I can remember in the Bitches when Uptown Girl walked into Winner's Bitch, Stars Uptown Girl, again, I'd have paid, if I'd had it, $1 million for her. I thought she was divine. And of course she won Winner's Bitch, and I'm pretty sure she won Best of Winners. And then there was so many I couldn't remember, but I often look back through my catalogue and that and reminisce. But when that Stars Blue Jeans walked into that ring, I had never, ever, ever seen anything like it. She was everything I would ever want in a collie, all rolled into one. And she also had the personality and the aura she had filled the whole stadium. It was just amazing. Hence the first litter I had from my 2 American imports was I called her Vedamea Uptown Girl, and I called her Breezy for a call name. And of course, so those 2 girls for me were just out of this world. Anyway, moving on, after 10 or 12 years of importing the first collies, I heard Debbie Holland was selling a bitch called Fantasy Fait Accompli. She was a talisman daughter, and I thought, no, I don't think Barry's going to play ball on this one. We'd spent enough money, so to speak. However, I couldn't resist it, so I contacted Debbie, and fortunately she agreed to keep her for the time she had to for testing. I think her quarantine time here was just around 2000, was probably about 5 months or 4 months, might even be 3 months, because they did, I mean, it's down to 10 days now, but I mean, it went from 9 months to 6 months to 5 months to 3 months to a month, and until finally it's down to 10 days. So Debbie was prepared to keep her for me and do the all the testing that took place. And the day she arrived here in Sydney, she flew direct from America to Sydney. Barry was going to work, and because he always worked at International Terminal, he would arrive all the international planes. And this morning I thought, how am I going to tell him? Because the first thing you want to know is I've heard of so many animals that had died on, not so many, but different animals over the years that they'd opened up the Holt door, and sure enough, they didn't make it. Because if the heaters go off, it's just like people, they're going to die. So of course you always want to know the nervousness of a dog coming all this way. You want to know that it's breathing. Anyway, he left home at 3 o'clock every morning, as he did, and I got up this morning and I said, look, I've got something to tell you. And he said, what? And I said, there's a flight coming in at 6:45 this morning, and in the Holt is our new bitch. He goes, what? What? I said, don't worry about it, I paid for it, she's all paid for, everything's done. And he said, you what? He was not impressed. Well, on the outside he wasn't, but inside. So he gets to work, and I'm hanging on the phone. And he couldn't ring me because there was no such thing as mobile phones, not that he is into phones, never has been and never will be. So, but anyway, he gets into the hole, and he must have borrowed one of the guys' phones from work, and he rang me, and here's this which he wasn't allowed to, but here's this bitch just brawling in slime coat. It was just absolutely horrible. And he opens the door and he said, "She is stunning." She is. Well, that was the end of it. That I didn't have any of what I'd anticipated in the way of his approval or otherwise. And of course, Juliet, as we called her, became the love of his life. So that experience just steamrolled our breed type along, especially our heads. The heads in America are just absolutely amazing. Particularly the fantasy heads, and that's something we needed to improve on here. And then the first litter we had by our own stud, Beau, to Juliet, produced 6 pups. I think it was 1 try and 5 sables. The whole lot of them titled, finished, as you can say over there, and one of them I sold to Mimbesta of Barkey Lodge College in Tasmania, and I did not know Mim before this, being down in an island of Tasmania, which is of course not on the mainland, so it's always difficult to get there, etc. And Mim heard that I was bringing Juliet in, and unbeknown to me at that stage, she had for 16 years, I think this is probably the most patient person I've ever known, she had an order in with Mary Wells of Blossom Hill for a smooth bitch. Mim understood the importance of breeding the smooths with the roughs. Definitely, I did not understand at that stage how important it was to our roughs, and if more people, including myself, wasn't aware of it, I'm sure that our roughs would not have receded really in quality, which they did over a period, because they just weren't getting the dominance of the smooth. The smooths were much more pure, and they certainly had the traits that we were losing in our roughs. And people that were into roughs here are just into roughs. They're not into smooths. For American breeders have always admired and appreciated what one variety can give the other. So we were lucky enough that it was we were allowed to breed them together here, where in England they're not, and in New Zealand they were not until very recently, when Mim of Barkey Lodge encouraged or worked in with a woman in New Zealand who wanted to, she was an excellent breeder of a different breed, and she wanted to establish the smooth in New Zealand. And they had the same rules as England, so they set to, and only 6 to 12 months ago they got permission to start breeding the smooths with the roughs again, which was excellent news for New Zealand. Anyhow, Mim had met Mary Wells about the same time as I had first started looking at Americans myself. Unbeknown to me, she lived in America for a couple of years, and she got to know Mary Wells, and she ordered a smooth from Mary. In other words, the requirements were, when Mary bred something that was smaller and would work in well and infuse well with her stuff here. There's quite a bit of history between Mary and Mim and her English imports, right back to her first 2 English imports, but I'll leave that story for Mim one day, hopefully, to be able to tell herself. So with I lost my train of thought for a moment. So Mim knew at that stage that Mary had a plan, and it wasn't too far off, that her smooth was about to arrive. Mary had chosen Talisman. No, it wasn't a Talisman's son, I beg your pardon, as the stud for, how could I forget, Blossom Hill, you all know who I mean, a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful picture, I can't think of the name at the moment, but to breed her to, and she said to Mum, I'm sure there'll be something in there that will be suitable for you. So, of course, Mum, like most of us do, wanted to keep it under wraps until it actually happened, and it was on the ground, it was healthy and almost, on the plane. But once she had heard that I already had something that had just arrived from a fantasy, she thought, surely we could do something great together. So, unbeknown to me, I was more than happy to sell Mum a bitch from that first litter, and I sold her Paris. I also, two other breeders here, I allowed I sold one of the boys, two of the boys actually, studs, two sables, to different breeders, and I kept the bitches, the other two bitches, and the tricoloured dog myself. So, from the day they hit the ground, Vedamea never looked back. It just went from strength to strength. Then when Annika arrived from Blossom Hill, American Dream she was called, Mim and I started to work together, and between which as a result we were infusing English from Corridon, we were infusing the American, and we were infusing what we had here ourselves, and I'd have to say that we've just gone from strength to strength, and we work wonderfully in together. We still have our own things we beg to differ on, but on the whole we both walk the same path, and as a result both Barky Lodge and Vedamea have been very, very successful, extremely grateful. Mim also bought another, or I should say a protege of Mim bought in, and her bought in another smooth a few years later, and once Mim educated me on the importance of infusing the smooth with the roughs. Another smooth that came in here, he came from a Blue Mill smooth, came in, Dyro, geneticist brought him in from, oh God, I've lost it again, I can't think of the lines, anyway, it might come to me, and he also has contributed greatly to our gene pool. He lives with me now and has done for quite a few years now, the Jesueski's dog. I get dreadful, I get too much in my mind to think of all of those. Anyhow, in saying that, I did a little, what's the name, yesterday, and I've looked at how many, being the first person to, of course, look at bringing in American collies 34 years ago. No, not 34 years ago, I should say. No, it's about 30 years since we brought them in. What has amazed me is eventually a lot of the breeders decided that here that they would do likewise. And it's unfortunate because out of all of the imports, which we've brought in a total of 32 American imports, or I should say 32 American, in amongst them there's also um, 5 from Canada. We've bought there's been 6 or 7 bought in from the same breeder, and out of those there's been 4 smooths and the balance of roughs. So for bringing in 13 breeders overall have bought in a total of 32 collies in the last probably 10 years. And it's unfortunate that their genetics has not been used very much at all, which is a shame, because I don't know why. Most of them bought them in and then never really did anything with them. A lot of them were never ever used, and never produced. And I mean, we're looking at a lot of money to import dogs from the States. It's so far away, a lot of money. And it's a shame for the breed that they didn't utilise them. Most of them I haven't personally seen, some I have. Most I've only seen photos of, but my young protege Jordan Wilkinson, who I haven't touched on yet, and I should have done well and truly by now. Jordan came along when she was about 18 years old. She had already purchased a dog off me as a pet, and at the same time I had bred a bitch in another litter, about a week difference in age, and she was blind. Had nothing to do with collie eye. It was strictly something in utero. Never found out, don't know what it was, but she was absolutely blind, and Jordan's mother asked if she could have her as a pet rather than me put her down, and that Jordan's new puppy of the same age would be her eyes. And she turned out she was actually a litter sister to Jordan's Lydia, who's Vedamea, Be My Alibi, who Jordan's had an incredible amount of success with, and she's now, 11 years old. It's a shame that, and now of course Jordan's starting up on her own. She's just got her own breeding prefix, and she's about to go out there and try her luck at it, and Mim and I are doing our best to mentor her, and she's not a hard one to mentor. She's a typical scorpion. She's a real sponge, and I introduced her to one of your best breeders and groomers in America, Nancy McDonald, and Jordan went over and lived with Nancy for a while and learned all the tricks of the trade, and came back here and put them into action, and there was no stopping her. She's extremely successful in the show world over here. She wins big wins. They're not just ordinary wins. She travels quite a bit to shows. She's totally and utterly hooked, so to speak. So it's lovely to know that because there's so little, so few people in this generation that are interested in the collie breed here, it's great to see people like Jordan who have taken it on and embraced it, because with them, without people like Jordan, the breed is going to be lost, or could be lost easily, because so few breeders, collie breeders, are around these days. They're just, it's considered to be an old-fashioned breed. Admittedly, the smooths, I don't know how many people order smooths daily. We would get 8 to 10 orders a day without fail, and most of them are for smooths, because people today haven't got the time and don't want the expense of having them groomed, and don't have the time themselves to do it. A lot of the smooths are in demand for service dogs, for children with autism and disabilities. So it's a shame that we just don't have many people like Jordan that are going to be able to keep the collie up there in the public's eye, which is a shame. But many of our dogs that are derived from our American imports. We bought another one from Fantasy a couple of years after Juliet, Ty, and North Star, Fantasy North Star. He titled in the States, and my good friend Hildy Morgan, he lived down with her for a few months until he had finished his championship, because Debbie wanted to earn his dam, the ROM for her breeder, for the breeder of his ROM, and of course he had to go through all those other tests and that they do before they leave for the States. And when Ty arrived out here, he again contributed greatly to our gene pool, and again behind most of all our good stuff today. And then last but not least, I had been chasing something from the I always go to say Twin City, from Carl Williford, Twin City. And I got to know Carl and Nancy when I stayed with Nancy a few times, and Carl, along with Russell Dyke and his wife Julie, agreed to sell me Manisha. She was by a Blue Ridge dog, and her sister, of course, you all know over there, Anna, who's a great winner and a very successful collie. And Manisha arrived on our shores about 6 years ago, and she's the delight of our life. Another one that won Barry over. She could win anyone over, actually. And she's just got that aura about her, and she reminds me so much when I look at her of so many of the qualities that Blue Jeans had, and I've already told you what I thought of Blue Jeans, so I couldn't be happier than we are with Manisha. She's just a sweetheart. We've moved in the last 12 months. We decided to downsize because we were in retirement, and we moved up to a place on the north coast of Sydney on the beach, and our front yard, it's a suburban size block, which is small, but our backyard is the beach. And of course the collies we have here think they're in heaven. But Manisha has a terrible trait of loving everyone she meets, so she just wanders off up the beach on her own, gets as many pats as possible, and anyone that pats her more than twice, she wants to go home with them. So there's not a lot of loyalty there with Manisha. She's just got the most amazing personality. And in the production stakes, she's done very, very well. And she's had 3 great litters, or 7 or 8 in each litter, and yeah, so what more can we say? As far as my initial gamble to launch into something as big as establishing what was considered unacceptable in Australia, and over 3 decades or more, to have had so much success. Of course, none of this could be done on our own. I mean, we've had some wonderful people backing us, both in the States and here. So I virtually handed over all my showing as far as to Jordan, who I couldn't ask for a more amazing handler, a groomer, and now I'm educating her to, or doing my best to teach her all the finer points of breeding, and she's certainly soaking that up real fast. She's also a designer, industrial, I was going to say that thing, graphic designer. So she has so many talents, and of course she's so attractive into the bargain, so she has everything that is needed for showing dogs. She has a personality like miniature. Everybody loves Jordan, and she always sees the good in people. So, you know, to have a protege of her enthusiasm, she's just amazing. And how lucky could we be to have someone like Jordan? To have someone like Mim to bounce things off and work things out together is also inspiring, and certainly keeps us both, we keep each other on track. And yeah, much in all as I declared I'm retired, I think I'll probably still be in the whelping box, or trying to get into the whelping box, right up until I'm heading for my own box, which I hope's not too soon, but we'll see. With that, I think I'll probably roll up if there's any questions. I'm just looking to see here if there is any questions. Oh wow. Now, what is your strategy when you need to breed outside of your family? Struggle to find enough quality to have options in small gene pool. Hector. Hector, in response to your question, fortunately, working in so well with Barty Lodge Collies, who for many, many years, well, until she got her first American Smooth from Blossom Hill, she had imported quite a number of English Corridon collies. And Corridon, of course, is one of the most famous and one of the longest established kennels in the world. You know, we're looking at around, I don't know, it must be 50, 60 years, 70 years maybe, and John is still going. And of course, Miranda took over from him. They've bred some amazing collies, and over the years they've also recognised that America has traits that they need to improve in England, and they've adopted those as well and fused them. And so between Mim and myself and Dr. Rowe, originally from America, who lives in Australia now, we don't have much trouble finding something, but we are getting to the stage where we're nervous. I will give you that. We are at the stage where we're freezing dogs up, which is not 100% successful here in Australia. They're still very much in the embryonic stages of working with semen, frozen, chilled here. So that's not very successful. But yeah, we are. We're not so much worried at the very minute in time. We've still got genetics to work with, but not too far down the track. For example, we could leave Jordan in a bit of a mess, because I'm not sure that that the breed itself is. I mean, Jordan can't hold it all up on her own, and there's not too many like Jordan in Australia these days. So we don't know where, but Mim and I cry over it every time we talk, and there's not much we can do, but we certainly are working on it, and hopefully we can. Hector, what is the dog bitch that you have bred that is closest to your vision of breed ideal? The bitch probably the most is a dog called, well, Jordan's Lydia is probably one of the boys, and I will post some photos after this live stream, which I meant to do yesterday, but it just didn't happen. But she will be one of the most closest to my breed type that I like, and yeah, Jordan's helping me along here with my chronic memory. The blues, so yeah, but I will post something. How do head types in Australia differ from American collies? Very different in the fact that they're nowhere near as refined as they could be. And that's the area that I mean, after all, a collie is a head breed. Whether you like it or not, it is a head breed. And therefore, what America did give us is they gave us the head type. In other words, they catapulted us years ahead. We would have taken forever without the help of the American collies in regard to our head types. So yes, our heads were very farm type heads by comparison, if you like. Some of them, not all of them, but in other words, the ones that were reasonably good here would have taken probably another 40, 50 years of really good breeding in order to reach what we could get off America and buying one or two collies, as long as we bred them properly once they got here. And where are we here? That was wonderful, thank you. Fascinating tour, thank you. The blue smooth was Jericho knock. Oh, good on you, Jordan. You've come in behind. Thank you. What else is here? Anything else? Hello from Canada. Hi from Carolina. Hi from Pennsylvania. I hear you. Boy, if only I knew a bit about IT. Okay, well, that seems to be all the questions for now. As I said, I didn't get round to posting some photos for you people, but I will. What is it here? Gail. Okay, Gail. Do Australian exhibitors groom as much as the US exhibitors? No, absolutely not. They don't. Oh, Jordan does, but she was taught by me, who learnt from, and she then was taught all the finer points from Nancy McDonald. But the one thing that we don't do here is use makeup or foreign substances. One, they're illegal, but not the judges would bother to look much. But we don't use much in the way of makeup, and that's something, as I judge in America, I find that one thing I do say to exhibitors, the lesser makeup, the better your dogs look to me, and the better you'll do it to me. I just think your dogs are so beautiful they don't need the makeup. So yeah, we don't use that, and we don't trim as much as you do over there. In other words, shape and that. So they're a little bit more raw here. How do your grooming techniques differ from ours? Well, apart from the fact that your makeup and your shaping, scissoring, is probably a lot greater than here, and of course a lot of people here don't do either. But what the Australian people have learned is they have had to change and really get on the ball of their grooming, and really get it up to scratch, because they couldn't compete with us, because we were our grooming had improved untold. The same as our exhibition of them, where we all taught our dogs to stand naturally, which I think is part of your standard from memory. We don't have it in our standard, but a collie should come to a stop and be able to stand and show itself without us propping its legs and its ears up. Well, that did stop here once we started, once the American breeds started to come in here. So that was a good thing. Yeah, I think that's just about it. Any more questions? I don't see. What are we at? 1:29. Oh, it's 1:30. We've been going an hour and a half. Wow. So, where are we? Is that it? Have I got any messages here? Let me have a look. God, how did I ever get it going? I don't think there's an awful lot more to cover. All I'd like to say to the American people is you have no idea how much you've contributed to the breeds, to our breed over here in Australia. But I'm sure that if we hadn't taken the initiative when we did 3 decades ago, the collie would never have improved at the rate it did. But at the same time, it was a big. You people have contributed in the way that we would never have got to where our colleagues would never have got to where they are today without your help and the fact that you were happy to share your genes with us. And I hope that it continues, but I hope that it continues in the fact that it's very sad that when I look at how many collies have been exported out here from America and not been utilised to their full extent, some of them not used at all. In fact, it's just so sad. But there's not much you can do about what other people do. It's their life. Anyway, hopefully I might, if this dreadful COVID-19, if we get that under control. I was supposed to be in America in a couple of months' time, judging some collie specialties and some all breed shows, as I was meant to be in a few other countries of the world, but of course all of that has gone down the road, and so I don't know when that's going to happen again, but it was a bit disappointing. I was all excited. I hadn't been over for a year or so, and I was really looking forward to October this year, but unfortunately you just have to wait. Do they tape ears in Australia? Yes, we do, but you've got to remember that the taping of the ears, I haven't taped ears now for years. I used to all the time, because if you have your heavy ear, of course, it's not where it should be, situated on the head. But what a lot of people don't understand is you can't change one head. I learnt this reading The Evolution of the Collie. You can't change one thing on your head and not another. You must change the whole head when you're breeding for better quality heads. And once we found that the ears were getting higher on our heads, we were having trouble. We used to take, so we got them high on the heads when we had this big heavy farm type ears. But now what is happening is because the ears are nice, really in the right place on top of the head, we're having trouble with our tips. And yes, we have to tape our tips for anything up to 12-18 months, strictly to once the dogs have passed their teething process, which of course the back molars can take 12 to 18 months to come through. So yes, taping ears are a pain, but you've got to take the good with the bad, I guess. And thank you to Hector for all your comments. And I think we might leave that at that, unless somebody's got something else to say. There's Debbie. Thank you, Debbie. I'm enjoying it. Yeah. Oh, don't think of Fancy Bronze Sensation. That's her. Yeah, you're right, Debbie. Fancy Bronze Sensation was bred to Cinnamon. and produced Annika. And Annika's done so much out here for the American collie. Mim and I just absolutely love what we've got from the States. We've loved what we've done with what we've got, and we think that we got lots of things we can improve on, but at the same time I think we've done a wonderful job over the years with the help of our American friends. Okay, well, I think we'll give that wind that up, and I guess I just end the live video, do I? I'm not very good on the CT stuff, I can tell you. Let's turn up. What do I do? What is it? An hour and a half, more than enough. So, thank you, that was great. Okay, end it. Okay, Nancy, thank you.